The sun was barely peeking through the Los Angeles skyline when Keanu Reeves rolled out of bed. His muscles were sore from yesterday's intense filming session for his new action movie. He'd been doing his own stunts as usual, and his body was definitely feeling it. Running his fingers through his messy hair, he glanced at his phone. 6:45 a.m. The early morning quiet felt like a blessing after weeks of chaotic filming schedules. He threw on a simple black t-shirt and jeans, grabbed his favorite worn-out leather jacket, and headed out. The morning air had that crisp freshness that only exists before the city fully wakes up. Usually, his personal assistant would handle his breakfast arrangements, but today he wanted something different, something normal. Something that reminded him of the times before fame when he could just walk into a store like anybody else. That's when he spotted it, Sweet Dreams Bakery, a small shop tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop. The warm, golden light spilling from its windows and the smell of fresh bread were impossible to resist. Through the window, he could see trays of golden croissants and muffins being arranged. His stomach growled in response. The bell above the door chimed softly as he pushed it open. The bakery was cozy, with walls painted in warm honey tones and old black and white photos of the city decorating the walls. Behind the counter, a young woman was carefully arranging a massive order of pastries while simultaneously managing the morning rush of customers. She moved with practiced efficiency, her hands quick and sure as she boxed up orders. Keanu joined the short line, pulling his phone out to check some messages from his agent about tomorrow's shooting schedule. The lady in front of him was taking her time deciding between different types of bread, asking detailed questions about ingredients and baking times. Normally, this wouldn't bother him at all. He was known for his patience and kindness, after all. But today was different. His head was pounding from lack of sleep. The bruise on his shoulder from a stunt gone slightly wrong was throbbing. The messages from his agent were getting more urgent, something about schedule changes and reshoots. The peaceful morning he'd hoped for was slipping away with each passing minute. When he finally reached the counter, the young cashier held up one finger, asking him to wait while she finished organizing a large catering order. Any other day, he would have understood. Any other day, he would have been the perfect gentleman everyone knew him to be. But sometimes, even the nicest people have their breaking points. The aroma of fresh coffee and pastries filled the air, but instead of being comforting, it just made him more aware of how hungry and tired he was. The clock on the wall seemed to tick louder with each passing second. Outside, the LA traffic was picking up, the sound of honking horns filtering through the windows. Around him, other customers were starting to notice who he was, despite his attempt to keep a low profile. He could hear the whispers, see the phones discreetly pointing in his direction. The fishbowl feeling he usually managed to ignore was becoming overwhelming. All he wanted was a simple breakfast, a moment of normalcy in his incredibly public life. The young cashier was still focused on her task, meticulously checking each item against an order list. Her dedication would have been admirable if he wasn't running on empty. The combination of physical exhaustion, hunger, and the growing attention from other customers created a perfect storm of frustration. He shifted his weight from one foot to another, checking his watch for what felt like the 100th time. The messages on his phone were still coming in, each one adding to the pressure building inside him. In the background, he could hear the kitchen staff calling out orders, the coffee machine hissing, and customers chatting. What had started as a quest for a peaceful morning had turned into anything but, and that's when it happened, the moment that would turn this ordinary morning into something entirely unexpected. A moment that would remind everyone present that fame and kindness don't always go hand in hand, and that sometimes the most important lessons come when we least expect them. Little did Keanu know, but this morning would become more than just another celebrity sighting story. It would turn into a tale about humanity, humility, and the power of owning up to our mistakes. The young cashier behind the counter had no idea that her response to what was about to happen would change not only her life, but also remind one of Hollywood's most beloved actors about the importance of staying true to oneself, especially on the hard days. The young cashier behind the counter was having quite a morning herself. She'd been up since 3 a.m., preparing for a major catering order while trying to review her medical school notes. The textbook underneath the counter was still open to a chapter about cardiac surgery, with colorful sticky notes peeking out from between the pages. Her hands moved quickly as she arranged pastries in boxes, each movement precise despite her exhaustion. The morning had started with a small crisis. One of her co-workers had called in sick, leaving her to handle both the counter and the massive catering order for a nearby tech company's board meeting. But she wasn't one to complain. This job was helping her pay for her dream of becoming a doctor, and she'd learned long ago that complaining didn't solve anything. The regular customers who came in every morning knew her well. They'd watched her grow from a nervous new employee to someone who could handle the morning rush with grace. Some even brought her medical journals they'd finished reading, knowing she'd appreciate them. The elderly couple who owned the flower shop next door often said she reminded them of their daughter, hardworking, determined, and always wearing a gentle smile despite the challenges. Today's catering order was particularly tricky. The client had specific requirements about how each pastry needed to be arranged, and the order was worth enough money to make a significant difference to the bakery's monthly revenue. She'd promised her boss she could handle it, and she was determined not to let him down. The morning rush was in full swing when she noticed a tall figure join the line. Even without looking directly at him, she could tell it was someone famous from the way other customers started whispering and pulling out their phones. But she kept her focus on the task at hand. Each box needed to be perfect, each item counted twice to avoid any mistakes. Her mind was juggling multiple tasks at once, remembering which regular customers needed their usual orders, keeping an eye on the fresh batch of croissants in the oven, and making sure the catering order was organized correctly. The medical terminology she'd been studying since dawn was still floating through her head: aortic valve replacement, coronary bypass, stenotomy. She'd have a big exam next week, and every spare moment was precious study time. The wall clock showed 7:15 a.m. She had exactly 45 minutes to finish the catering order before the client's driver would arrive to pick it up. The pressure was mounting, but she maintained her composure. Years of balancing work and studies had taught her the importance of staying calm under pressure. She could feel the impatience radiating from some customers in line, particularly from the famous actor who had just reached the counter. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw him checking his watch repeatedly. Under normal circumstances, she would have dropped everything to serve him, not because he was famous, but because that's just how she treated every customer. Today, though, she needed just a few more minutes to finish the catering order. One small mistake could mean redoing entire sections of the carefully arranged pastry boxes. The morning sun was now streaming through the bakery's windows, creating golden patches on the wooden floor. The coffee machine hissed in the background, and the smell of fresh bread filled the air. It was the kind of morning that usually made her smile, reminded her why she loved working here, despite the early hours and demanding schedule. As she placed the last pastry in its designated box, she felt a small sense of triumph. The catering order was finally perfect, each box labeled, each item counted, everything arranged exactly as requested. She was just about to turn her full attention to the waiting customers when she heard an impatient sigh from the counter. Looking up, she found herself face to face with Keanu Reeves himself. The moment their eyes met, she could tell this wasn't going to be the kind of celebrity encounter that made for happy social media posts. There was tension in the air, thick enough to cut with one of the bakery's bread knives. What happened next would test both her professional composure and her personal dignity in ways she never expected. The tension in the bakery had reached its breaking point. Keanu stood at the counter, his usual calm demeanor nowhere to be found. The lack of sleep, the aching muscles, and the mounting pressure from his phone's constant buzzing had worn down his patience to a paper-thin edge. He'd been standing there for what felt like forever, watching the young cashier meticulously arrange pastries while seemingly ignoring his presence. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying a tone that made several nearby customers look up from their phones. "I've been waiting here for quite a while." The words came out sharper than he'd intended, tinged with an irritation that felt foreign even to him. This wasn't how he usually spoke to people. Anyone who knew him would tell you that. The cashier looked up briefly, her hands still moving through the final touches of the catering order. "I'll be with you in just a moment, sir. I need to finish this order first." Her voice was professional but firm, showing no sign of being starstruck or intimidated by who he was. Maybe it was the lack of special treatment that got to him, or perhaps it was the morning's growing stress finally finding its release point. Whatever the reason, what happened next would become a moment Keanu would rather forget. "You know," he said, leaning slightly on the counter, "in my line of work, making people wait like this would get you fired." The words hung in the air like a heady fog. A few gasps came from the other customers. This wasn't the Keanu Reeves they knew from interviews and fan encounters. This wasn't the humble, kind-hearted actor who regularly made headlines for his generous acts and down-to-earth personality. The bakery fell silent. Even the usual morning bustle seemed to pause. The coffee machine's gentle hum became the only sound in the room. Through the windows, the LA morning traffic continued its usual dance, unaware of the drama unfolding inside the small bakery. The young cashier slowly placed the last pastry in its box, her movements deliberate and controlled. She closed the catering box with care, her face showing no reaction to his words. But her hands, usually so steady, trembled slightly as she smoothed the bakery's logo sticker across the box's corner. A child in line behind Keanu tugged at his mother's sleeve, loudly whispering, "Mom, isn't that the nice man from those movies?" The innocent question seemed to echo through the quiet bakery, making the moment even more uncomfortable. Keanu's words had done more than just break the morning calm. They'd shattered the image of himself he'd worked so hard to maintain. He could feel the disappointment radiating from the other customers. Phones that had been excitedly recording the celebrity sighting were now lowering, their owners unsure whether they wanted to document this moment. The cashier finally turned to face him fully. The medical textbook under the counter was still visible, its pages marked with countless sticky notes, evidence of late-night study sessions and dreams bigger than this bakery counter. Her name tag caught the morning light, and for the first time, Keanu actually read it, really saw the person wearing it. The exhaustion in her eyes mirrored his own, but there was something else there too, a dignity that his words hadn't managed to dent. She stood straighter, adjusting her apron with one hand while the other remained resting on the completed catering order, her morning's work perfectly executed despite the pressure and interruptions. The next few seconds would define this encounter. The young cashier opened her mouth to respond, and the whole bakery seemed to hold its breath. The morning sun continued to stream through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor, as two tired souls faced each other across a counter full of pastries and unspoken words. What happened next would not only change the course of their morning, but would also become a powerful reminder that our true character often reveals itself in our most unguarded moments. The story of how a simple morning at a bakery turned into a lesson in humility was about to take an unexpected turn. The young cashier took a deep breath, her hands now steady as she placed the completed catering order safely aside. The morning light caught the determination in her eyes as she turned to face Keanu fully. The bakery remained silent, every customer watching the scene unfold, phones forgotten in their hands. "Sir," she began, her voice clear and composed, "I understand you're having a rough morning. I can see it in your face and I get it. We all have those days." She paused, gesturing to the perfectly arranged catering order beside her. "But this order represents someone else's important morning too. It's for a small local business that saved up to provide breakfast for their entire staff. They trusted us to get it right." Her words carried no anger, no hint of the hurt his earlier comment had caused. Instead, they held something more powerful, quiet dignity and unwavering professionalism. The medical textbook peeking out from under the counter caught Keanu's eye again as she continued. "You mentioned getting fired in your line of work," she said, a gentle smile touching her lips. "In my line of work, both here and where I'm headed, we learn that every person deserves the same level of respect and attention, whether they're a famous actor or the elderly gentleman who comes in every morning for his one cup of coffee and day-old bread because that's all he can afford." The morning sun had fully risen now, casting a warm glow throughout the bakery. A fresh batch of croissants was being pulled from the oven, their buttery aroma filling the air. The ordinary morning sounds seemed to underscore the extraordinary moment unfolding at the counter. "I'm working this job to put myself through medical school," she continued, her voice growing softer but no less firm. "Every customer who walks through that door, every order I fill, every early morning shift, it's all part of a bigger dream. And in both medicine and customer service, we don't give preferential treatment. Everyone matters equally." A few customers nodded in agreement. The elderly couple from the flower shop next door, who had just walked in, smiled knowingly. They'd witnessed this young woman's dedication firsthand over the past years, watching her balance her studies with work, never complaining, always maintaining her dignity. Your status as a celebrity, she added, meeting his gaze steadily, doesn't change the fact that right now, you're simply a customer in line at a bakery. Just like everyone else here, you deserve respect, and that's exactly what I'm showing by ensuring each customer's order is handled with care, including the one I just finished. The bakery's old clock ticked steadily on the wall, marking each second of this unexpected confrontation. Outside, the LA morning traffic continued its usual rhythm, a stark contrast to the powerful silence within the small shop. "Now," she said, her professional demeanor never wavering, "what can I get for you today?" She stood ready at the register, her posture straight, her eyes clear and direct. The simple question carried with it an opportunity, a chance for this moment to become something more than just another celebrity meltdown story. The other customers watched, their phones now lowered, many nodding in appreciation of her words. Even the kitchen staff had paused their work, sensing the importance of this moment. A young girl in line whispered to her mother, "She's so brave," loud enough for everyone to hear. The air in the bakery felt different now, charged not with tension, but with something else. Something that reminded everyone present that dignity doesn't come from fame or status, but from how we treat others, especially in challenging moments. The ball was now in Keanu's court. His response to this moment would determine whether this would become just another celebrity scandal or something far more meaningful. The young cashier stood her ground, embodying the kind of quiet strength that comes from knowing your worth and standing up for what's right, regardless of who stands before you. Time seemed to slow down in the bakery as Keanu stood there, the cashier's words washing over him like a wave of clarity. The morning sunlight streaming through the windows highlighted everything he hadn't noticed before in his frustrated state. It was like seeing the whole scene with new eyes, and what he saw made his stomach twist with shame. Under the counter, the medical textbook lay open to a chapter about emergency procedures, its pages dotted with detailed notes in neat handwriting. Coffee cups from what must have been her early morning study session were tucked discreetly beside it. His small calendar peeking out showed shifts color-coded around exam dates and study groups, evidence of a life carefully balanced between dreams and responsibilities. The Employee of the Month certificate on the wall behind her caught his attention next. It wasn't just one certificate, there were several, dating back months. Each one had a different comment about exceptional service, going above and beyond, maintaining professionalism under pressure. This wasn't just a jolt for her, it was a stepping stone to something bigger, and she was giving it her all. His eyes drifted to the perfectly arranged catering order she had just completed. Each pastry was placed with precision, the boxes labeled with care. He thought about his own early days, working odd jobs while pursuing acting, how every role, no matter how small, had mattered to him. How had he forgotten what that felt like? The other customers in the bakery were still watching, but their expressions had changed. Gone was the excitement of spotting a celebrity. Instead, there was something like disappointment mixed with curiosity about what he would do next. A young boy who had been excitedly showing his mother a photo of Keanu from The Matrix now held his phone down, looking confused at the difference between the hero on his screen and the man standing at the counter. Through the front window, he could see the delivery driver for the catering order pulling up. The timing of it all suddenly struck him, how the cashier had been racing against the clock to complete this important order, how his impatience had tried to derail her professional commitment. In movies, he often played characters who fought for what was right, who stood up against bullies. Today, he had become what he usually fought against in his films. The morning rush sounds filtered back into his awareness. The coffee machine's gentle hum, the ding of the kitchen timer, the soft chatter of customers. These were the sounds of ordinary people living their lives, each with their own struggles and dreams. The very normality he had been seeking when he walked in had been here all along, but he had been too caught up in his own importance to see it. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, probably another message about schedule changes or script revisions. But for the first time that morning, it didn't seem important. What mattered was the moment of truth he was facing, right here in this small bakery. The cashier's words about equal treatment echoed in his mind. He looked at her name tag again, really seeing it this time. He thought about how many times she must have dealt with difficult customers, yet maintained her composure and dignity. How many early mornings she had spent studying while others slept, working while others complained, pushing forward while others gave up. The revelation hit him hard. This wasn't just about a delayed breakfast order or a celebrity having a bad morning. This was about the kind of person he wanted to be, the values he claimed to stand for. He had built a reputation not just as an actor, but as someone known for kindness and humility. In a few impatient moments, he had betrayed those values. A fresh batch of bread was being brought out from the kitchen, its warm, homey smell filling the air. Something about that simple, honest aroma seemed to underscore the moment. In movies, there was always a key scene where the main character faces their flaws and has to choose who they really are. Keanu realized he was living that scene right now, not on a movie set, but in real life. The weight of the moment pressed on him, demanding a response. The young cashier still stood there, professional and poised, waiting for his next move. Her quiet dignity made his earlier behavior seem even more shameful. The next few moments would define not just how this story ended, but what kind of person he chose to be when the cameras weren't rolling and the script wasn't written for him. The bakery remained still as Keanu slowly removed his sunglasses, folding them and placing them in his jacket pocket. His face softened, the morning's tension melting away as he took a deep breath. The simple action seemed to transform him from an irritated celebrity back into the person his fans knew him to be. "I owe you an apology," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the quiet bakery. "Actually, I owe everyone here an apology." He turned slightly to address the other customers before focusing back on the cashier. "What I just did, how I acted, that's not okay. It's not who I want to be." His words came out naturally, without the polish of a scripted movie scene. This was real, raw, and honest. A few customers who had been filming earlier lowered their phones completely, recognizing that this moment deserved more respect than social media fodder. "You're absolutely right," he continued, looking directly at the cashier. "Every person deserves respect, regardless of who they are or who they're serving. I forgot that this morning, and I'm truly sorry." The genuineness in his voice was unmistakable. This wasn't a celebrity doing damage control. This was a human being acknowledging a mistake. The delivery driver for the catering order had entered the bakery now, standing quietly by the door, witnessing this unexpected scene. The cashier glanced at the order she'd so carefully prepared, and Keanu noticed. "Please," he gestured toward the waiting driver, "take care of the delivery first. I can wait." A small smile crossed his face. "I should have offered that from the beginning." As the cashier and the driver handled the catering order exchange, Keanu turned to address the other customers again. "I came in here wanting a normal morning, trying to escape the celebrity bubble. Instead, I ended up acting entitled, exactly the opposite of what I wanted." He shook his head, running a hand through his hair in a gesture of humility. The elderly couple from the flower shop exchanged knowing looks. They'd seen plenty of people come through their shop over the years, but witnessing a famous actor show such genuine remorse was something new. "You know what makes this even more embarrassing?" Keanu continued, a self-deprecating smile crossing his face. "In my latest movie, I play someone who fights against privilege and stands up for ordinary people. Here I am doing exactly what my character would hate." A few gentle chuckles rippled through the crowd. The tension in the air had completely transformed into something warmer, more human. The morning sunlight seemed brighter somehow, the fresh bread smell sweeter. Turning back to the cashier as she finished with the delivery, Keanu reached for his wallet. "I'd like to buy breakfast for everyone here," he said, then quickly added, not as a celebrity gesture, but as an apology from one person to another. And he glanced at the medical textbook under the counter. "I'd love to hear about your studies while you prepare the orders." The young boy who had been disappointed earlier was smiling again, tugging at his mother's sleeve. "See, Mom, I told you he was nice in real life too." The bakery came alive with gentle conversation as people placed their orders. Keanu stayed at the counter, listening intently as the cashier talked about her medical school journey between serving customers. His phone buzzed again in his pocket, but he ignored it. This moment, this real human connection, was more important than any schedule or studio demand. "You know," he said quietly to the cashier as she prepared someone's order, In movies, we often get multiple takes to get things right. In real life, we only get one chance at each moment. Thank you for helping me make this one right. The morning had transformed into something none of the bakery's customers had expected when they first walked in. They had come for breakfast, but were witnessing something more valuable, a genuine moment of humanity, humility, and redemption, all unfolding over coffee and fresh pastries in a small lay bakery. The story of what happened that morning at Sweet Dreams Bakery didn't stay within its walls for long, but it didn't spread the way most celebrity encounters do. Instead of viral videos showing a star's meltdown, people shared something different, a story about human connection, humility, and the power of making things right. In the weeks that followed, the small bakery saw some changes. Regular customers noticed that Keanu would stop by 2 or 3 times a week, always during the quiet hours. He'd sit at the corner table with a coffee and a croissant, sometimes reading scripts, other times just enjoying the peaceful atmosphere he originally sought that fateful morning. The young cashier continued her work with the same dedication as always. Her medical textbooks remained under the counter, but now they were joined by study guides Keanu had brought her, books he'd learned about from his research for roles as doctors in various movies. They weren't exactly medical school material, but they made her laugh, and that counted for something during tough study sessions. One morning, about a month after the incident, the cashier arrived at work to find an envelope waiting for her. Inside was a letter announcing a new scholarship fund at her medical school, specifically for working students balancing education with full-time jobs. The donor was anonymous, but the bakery's owner smiled knowingly when she read the news. The elderly couple from the flower shop started noticing more acts of kindness in the neighborhood. Sometimes it was paid-forward coffee orders, other times it was anonymous donations to local causes. They couldn't prove it was Keanu, but they had their suspicions, especially when they learned that someone had covered a semester's worth of textbooks for all the working students in the cashier's medical school study group. The bakery itself became something of a local legend, though not in the way tourist attractions usually do. There were no signs advertising the place where Keanu Reeves learned humility. Instead, it became known as a place where everyone, celebrity or not, was treated with the same respect and warmth. The young boy who had witnessed everything that morning started bringing his homework to the bakery after school. His mother would buy him a hot chocolate, and he'd sit at the table near the window, occasionally glancing up hoping to spot Keanu. What stuck with him wasn't just the possibility of seeing a movie star, it was the memory of seeing someone famous choose to be kind, to admit their mistakes, to be simply human. The kitchen staff noticed changes too. The morning rush became calmer somehow, as if that day had taught everyone a lesson about patience and understanding. Even during the busiest hours, customers seemed more willing to wait their turn, more appreciative of the work being done behind the counter. One particularly meaningful change came 6 months later when the cashier passed her medical school exams with flying colors. She kept her job at the bakery even after starting her hospital rotations, working weekend shifts when she could. "This place taught me more about handling people with care than some of my medical textbooks," she'd say with a smile. Keanu never publicly spoke about what happened that morning, but people who knew him noticed a change. On movie sets, he became even more insistent about treating every crew member with respect, from the director to the cleaning staff. His reputation for kindness, already well known, grew even stronger. The wall of Employee of the Month certificates in the bakery continued to grow, joined now by newspaper clippings about local students achieving their dreams while working full-time. None of the articles mentioned Keanu directly, but regular customers would sometimes catch him looking at the wall with a quiet smile. The bakery's old clock still ticked away on the wall, marking time in the same steady rhythm. But now it witnessed more than just the daily rush of customers and coffee orders. It watched over countless small moments of kindness, inspired by one morning when a famous actor learned that true character isn't about who you are in the movies, but how you treat others when real life doesn't go according to script. Years later, when people would ask the cashier about that morning, she'd simply smile and say, "Sometimes the greatest lessons come with your morning coffee." She went on to become a respected doctor, known for her exceptional patience with patients and her ability to treat everyone, from hospital CEOs to cleaning staff, with the same level of respect and care. And as for Keanu, he found that normal morning he'd been looking for, not by demanding it, but by embracing the simple truth that real connections happen when we see each other as equals, acknowledge our mistakes, and choose kindness, even over coffee and pastries in a small lab bakery.